This is 5 Live Formula One with Jenny Gow.
Good morning, hello and welcome to coverage of the Australian Grand Prix. Yes, it's back after 2, maybe 3 years away. We are in Melbourne. It is Albert Park. It looks amazing. The sun is shining down. 20 cars are waiting to take part in free practice 2. The track's a little bit different and the pecking order is a little bit different from when we were last in Australia, because fastest in free practice 1 was Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari. Harry Benjamin is standing by, ready to take us through the commentary of free practice 2. And Harry, it was a good start for Ferrari.
It really was, topping the times at the end of FP1. Carlos Sainz topping it, becoming the first person to do that in Melbourne FP1. Only Hamilton and Rosberg have done that, so Sainz joins them in that illustrious stat, ahead of Leclerc. Also looking good at the Red Bulls, though, just behind them. Perez ahead of Verstappen. Also a word on McLaren, slightly improved pace. There could be some hope yet for the home hero.
Don't do
I've done it.
Harry, come on, don't get carried away. Ricciardo's best finish around the streets of Melbourne, actually a second, although that was taken away from him for a fuel flow irregularity in 2014 with Red Bull. So his best finish is a 4th place, and he would love a little bit of home cheer. And Mark Priestley is also in the commentary box for us, ex-F1 mechanic. The atmosphere, I think we have to talk about the atmosphere in Melbourne, because even though this isn't the start of the season, it's race 3, it's a pretty special place for all the teams and drivers to go racing.
Yeah, it really is. Everyone looks forward to this event from a perspective of those inside Formula One, because it's a great place to go. It's a great city. The circuit's in a great location. And with the changes to the track and the changes to the cars that we've got in 2022, there are high hopes for this weekend. We could see a much more exciting Australian Grand Prix than perhaps we've become accustomed to over recent years.
Yeah, the track is 24 metres shorter than it was. They've taken out a few kinks, they've taken out a few curves. Andrew Benson, the BBC's chief F1 writer, fast times already set, much faster than free practice 1 in 2019. And it looks like we're going to get some incredible speeds around this place.
Yes, they've taken out one of the slow chicanes, Jenny, and so there's now, around the back of the track, there's now a sort of long run from turn 6, which is actually faster as well. They've opened it out a bit, right the way around to the sort of fast left-right at what is now called turns 9 and 10, and then into a tightened corner after that, which they're hoping that whole stretch is going to promote overtaking. Of course, we don't know that yet until Sunday, but that's the hope, and it's taken a lot of time out of the lap times, and they're just going to get faster in this session as they, about halfway through, simulate their qualifying runs.
Yeah, should be really interesting to see. Qualifying takes place tomorrow. You can join us at 7 o'clock for that. We've got free practice 3 tomorrow at 4 a.m, so make sure you set your alarm clocks nice and early. Problems for Sebastian Vettel. Numerous problems, Harry. His car broke down, engine needs to be replaced. And he's also in trouble with his stewards, isn't he?
Yeah, it's not been the ideal start for Sebastian Vettel, of course, missing the first 2 rounds due to COVID, coming back in and having to be more fireman than racing driver at the moment. We're still waiting to hear back about that potential penalty for getting on the moped just after the track session ended, but not ideal. Vettel, of course, is the most successful driver on the current grid at this track. 3 wins to his name, but saying in the press conference earlier this week that he doesn't think he's going to get a win this weekend.
So many people have teed this up this weekend for, could Daniel Ricciardo get a much needed win around the streets of Australia? Could Vettel continue his winning? It's just like, come on. Come on. There's as much chance of rain in this session as there is of that happening this weekend. But who knows? Crazier things have happened. Okay, so free practice 2 going to get underway in about 30 seconds time, 40 seconds time, I correct myself. So let's hand over to the commentary box. It is Mark Priestley and, first of all, Harry Benjamin.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Yeah, just nearly 30 seconds to go here as we see on our screens Daniel Ricciardo in the car, getting his game face on, ready for FP2. I mentioned at the start of the show, McLaren seemingly with a little bit improved pace in practice, but it is only practice 1, but it was Norris in 5th, Ricciardo in 8th. So can they continue the good work from there? We'll wait to find out, and we'll do a little sync up for you as well in just a few seconds. So the session will start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And there should be a green light at the end of the pit lane. You're hearing the sound of a few cars head out on track. Lewis Hamilton not uber keen to get out straight away either. Mark Priestley alongside me. We spoke a lot about Mercedes in practice one, but Lewis Hamilton at the moment, work to do, and it's not happening overnight.
No, we're normally speaking about Mercedes in terms of how dominant they are, or whether they've got, what their chances are of winning the Grand Prix, even the championship. But this time around, as it stands, we're not talking about them in that light. We're talking about their troubles, the problems they've got with that car that potentially are inherent, baked into the design of that car. They've got to figure out a way to change that and overcome them as Lando Norris heads out onto the racetrack. First car out, I think. No, a couple of cars out already. Both of the Alfa Romeos, but Lando out there as well. Just trying to learn as much as possible. And that's what all the cars and drivers are trying to do, including Lewis and that Mercedes team. FP1 have been spent data collecting, trying to understand as much as they can, both about the cars but also about the changes to this circuit. A number of reprofiled corners, a new track surface for the first time in this circuit's 25-year history. So lots of unknowns, lots to learn, but which should make for an interesting weekend.
Yeah, I think there's 4 drivers who actually never raced here at all. That would be Latifi, Tsunoda, Schumacher, and there's another one off the top of my head, but it's gone. And Zhou, I should say.
Yeah.
But actually, it's really brand new for everybody almost, because although the majority of the corners are the same, it has changed the characteristics of this track a lot. Most of the track changes have been a widening by about 2.5, between 2 and 7 meters at certain tracks, reprofiling, as you say. And traditionally, Albert Park has been quite a bumpy track, but with this resurfacing, and how is that going to basically, speed up these cars, isn't it? But that's going to take a lot of time to bed in, because we're seeing track time quicker already in practice one, but it's still a very green track.
Well, it really is. I mean, this is a circuit that doesn't get used in terms of racing outside of this weekend at all. So it's always a green circuit as such. But this is a brand new surface, so new tarmac down, which tends not to be as grippy right in the beginning. So it will evolve over the weekend. It will get quicker and quicker, both as the circuit evolves, but also as the teams and drivers get used to it. And don't forget, we're coming here not with just an evolution of the cars that we all came here last year with, but with a completely new car, a new way of generating downforce from these cars. There's a new way of driving them and a new way of engineering them and getting the best out of them. So a huge amount that has to be learned over these practice sessions, which is why you're seeing cars out on track as much as possible. Whereas at some circuits, you might see people sitting in the garage and waiting until temperatures get better, the circuit conditions improve. They can't afford to do that this time. They've just got to get out there and learn.
Well, exactly. You're hearing the sound of Lando Norris. We ride on board with him through the new turn 9 and 10. Fast left-right-hander, which brings you now into the next DRS zone, down into the braking zone of turn 11, which has become a really prime overtaking spot. It's been widened, slightly reprofiled too, to allow for better racing. That's what all these track changes are aimed towards, where, of course, Albert Park not statistically the best for overtaking, and 4 DRS zones to aid with that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're all been made for the right reasons, and only time will tell if they've actually worked in terms of improving the racing, as Lando Norris crosses the line with a 1:21.8. Still somewhere off the pace, but this is his first push lap in this session. The other thing about the new surface, of course, is that we have lost a lot of those lumps and bumps, like you said. It won't be as abrasive as the circuit surface that we've been used to, and that has a big impact on tyre warm-up. And given we've got new tyres this year anyway, we've already seen a number of different strategies. Max Verstappen taking 2 laps in previous races this year to warm up his tyres and get them into that crucial and critical operating window. So that's another thing they need to be learning right now. How much abrasion is there on the circuit? How quickly are the tyres going to warm up? And is there a risk of them overheating if they push too hard for too long?
They certainly are. There's so many new things for the drivers and teams to get their heads around. At the moment, the Aussie fans will be very excited because it's Daniel Ricciardo who's just put in a fastest time at the moment. But Jenny's got some news for us too.
Yeah, just having a look at Sebastian Vettel. Obviously had that problem in free practice 1, which means the team down at Aston Martin are going to change the power unit. Now, that does take a little while to do, and at the moment they haven't remounted the gearbox yet. So I think it's going to be a little bit touch and go as to whether he actually gets out during this session or not. Of course, he missed the first 2 races due to COVID, so he's down on track time, down on actually handling these new Formula 1 cars. So the frustration, I would imagine.
I would guess that they will get that car out. I mean, the gearbox being off, they've had the time, of course, in between the sessions to start, changing the engine and the power unit itself. The gearbox being off actually shouldn't hold them up too much. If it is literally just a case of getting the gearbox back on, you could get that on in 10 minutes. So I suspect they'll be doing everything they can to get him out, because he, above all people, needs track time.
Now, I was going to start the Daniel Ricciardo hype train early, but Leclerc and Sainz have both gone clear of nearly a second clear to top the timings at the moment. But let's talk about Daniel Ricciardo, because we didn't really speak much about him in free practice one, as we're just seeing a replay though of Carlos Sainz coming into the penultimate corner and a huge traffic jam of cars queuing. We've got the Aston Martin and Lando Norris is in there as well, and actually this is going to be, we've already seen this being an issue in FP1 straight out the bat with Zhou Guanyu and George Russell complaining about traffic, and with this now long sweeper down the back of the track impeding and blocking, especially in qualifying, is going to be a huge issue these drivers have got to deal with.
Yeah, it really is, and the stewards and the FIA need to stamp that out really early. They need to get on top of it, which we've seen them do in the past. They need some very strict rules to make sure that can't be a safety concern. The other thing that I think, we've seen it in the first couple of races, this whole cat and mouse game leading up to DRS detection points. There are 2 DRS detection points on this particular racetrack, but 4 DRS zones. So the upshot of that is, if you get through that detection zone in second place, a bit like we saw in the last race with Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen, if you get in second place but within a second of the car in front, you get a huge amount of DRS as a result of that. So the win or the benefit of going through that detection zone second as opposed to first, given how long the 2 DRS zones are going to be here, could be really valuable. So that might lead into more of those slightly ridiculous games where you actually don't want to cross the line first.
Well, it certainly proved good entertainment in Saudi Arabia. Whether that comes here as well, especially that fight for the DRS line, is wait to be seen. But Daniel Ricciardo comes across the line now in the McLaren on home soil and puts it into second, a 1:21.0 on the median tyre, nearly a tenth and a half off Leclerc, but he splits the 2 Ferraris at the moment. And I wanted to talk about Ricciardo briefly, because it's not been the start McLaren or Ricciardo certainly wanted. I think they thought they'd be a lot further ahead than they actually are, but like a lot of the Mercedes power unit cars, struggling. But it's more than just the power unit for McLaren, isn't it? It's the car in total, and they're trying to get their head around it as well. But what can Ricciardo realistically hope for this weekend?
Well, he can realistically hope to match his teammate is the first thing he needs to do. In terms of overall performance, I think the reality is that could put them just outside the top 5 or so. That's about as good as they're going to hope for on pure pace. It's a real shame, because McLaren are on this real great trajectory over the last couple of years where they're heading back towards success. We even saw them take a win, even a 1-2 in Monza. So they've been heading in the right direction. Restructuring management, all good positions, all good people being put in there. They are building the basis of a really solid foundation to get a great team from that. What they found at the start of this year, and it is only the start, is a little bit like Mercedes, their interpretation of the new regulations in terms of their car design hasn't delivered the absolute performance out the box that they would have hoped for. And as we've discussed with Mercedes, it's not quite the quick fix that it used to have been, where you can throw money at the problem, just keep bringing new solutions until you find one that works. You've got to be more strategic about how you spend your budget under the budget cap regime that we're now under, and they're still figuring out the intricacies of exactly how these cars work. So tough, challenging times, but like Mercedes, they've got a great team, they've got a great team of people, and they will find their way out of trouble. It's just not going to be a quick fix. No,
and the regulations have done what people asked for. They've reshuffled the orders. Valtteri Bottas in the Alfa Romeo goes fast with a 1:24, just ahead of Charles Leclerc, Norris, Ricciardo and Sainz, the top 5. Jenny.
Yeah, just having a little look at the decisions from the FIA over impeding in the last session. So no further action for Lance Stroll. He was sent to the steward's office to have a look at whether he impeded Kevin Magnussen or not. So there's no further action on that one. But Carlos Sainz has got a reprimand for impeding, who was it? Zhou Guanyu. So it's his first reprimand of the season, so it's a bit of a rap on the knuckles, but it will mean that he needs to look at that. And it's obviously a warning, isn't it, to everybody else out there, saying you do have to be careful, don't block everybody else. And I already fear what's going to happen in qualifying, first part of qualifying tomorrow. It's going to be a mess.
I think Yuki Tsunoda will be on the radio with the traffic paradise at some point, I'm sure. But Bottas is currently leading the way. It's 49 minutes left of this session, 43, 42, 41, 40 seconds on the clock for those of you who would like to sync up. Free practice 2 in Albert Park. Daniel Ricciardo, we don't ride on board, but we're watching him come through the final couple of corners now, looking like a personal best at the moment on the medium tyre, or in fact everybody's on the mediums except for Tsunoda, Ocon and Gasly. Comes across the line, puts it into third, just in front of his teammate. Still no time though on the board for Verstappen, Magnussen, Vettel or Perez, or Mick Schumacher, but we just saw images of Vettel very much out of his car with no helmet on, but a smile on his face, Mark, but it didn't look like he'd be going anywhere anytime quickly, as we see an onboard of Verstappen bailing out of turn 10 and cutting across the runoff area.
Yeah, we're seeing mistakes from drivers this year, which I think is great. It means these cars are tricky to drive, they are heavier, they have got a very different way of producing downforce and therefore different driving styles to get the best out of them. They are struggling with tyres, lots of lockups. This can lead towards great racing, because we want to see mistakes being punished, as there's a dust cloud sweeping across the circuit from somebody clearly running off across the gravel. But this is what the Formula One of the modern era should be like. It shouldn't be that drivers almost of a sort of PlayStation-esque style can just get away with anything. It should be that they need to be pushing to the limit as much as possible, and if they go over that limit they get punished. And I think that's one of the major successes of these 2022 regulations for me.
I think it might have been Ricciardo who went off on the gravel in front of him, but I'm sure we'll get a replay at some point. On board, you're hearing the sound of Carlos Sainz on a fast lap as well. Purple in the first sector, but slower in the middle sector. And you're just seeing them really having to work at the wheel on turning, running out wide on the exit of the corners. These cars really require, they've got to be pushed and manhandled. It's great to see the driver having to really work with these cars as Sainz does go top, finds a bit more time in that final sector, nearly 2/10 ahead of Leclerc, Bottas, Alonso and Ricciardo, the top 5.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. We want to see the drivers really working at the wheel. We want to see that's Lewis Hamilton crunching through the gravel that you can hear there. We want to see them punished for mistakes. We want to see them at the end of a Grand Prix out of breath, sweating, looking like they're exhausted. And that's what I think we've seen over the first couple of races. I don't think we could say that last year or for a couple of years prior to that. It's almost felt, dare I say it, a little bit too easy, which is very easy for me to say, sat here in the commentary booth.
Way too easy, get on with it. Turn 13 incident involving Stroll and Hamilton will be investigated after the session. That's another impeding session as infringement, so I think we'll be seeing a lot of them lighting up the timing screen as the session unfolds. Now, momentarily, Bottas was leading in this session, and that's my somewhat segue into talking a little bit about Alfa Romeo, because and I'm keen to get your thoughts on this actually as well, because they've clearly got a really good car this year. They've got the baseline is good. They've got a good driver lineup, I would suggest as well. I think Zhou Guanyu has made a good start to his Formula One career and doesn't look out of place either.
Yeah.
But they've got this issue with their starts right now, and this oscillation on the clutch and these vibrations which have affected Bottas and Zhou arguably more so, especially when he hit the anti-stall in Saudi Arabia. What's going on with this clutch issue, and how can they get on top of that?
Well, I can't answer that, I'm afraid. I don't know the answer to that. I think the problem, first of all, Alfa Romeo is a major success story this year, isn't it? They've catapulted their way up the order, which is fantastic. It's great to see that, particularly from a Valtteri Bottas perspective, he's lost his seat at the top table of the sport, if you like, and whilst the team that he was fairly unceremoniously dropped from is now struggling, the team he's gone to, which nobody expected too much from, have now found their way into that mix where regularly they're now fighting the Mercedes. So that's a nice little success story. But you're right, with all the speed and the pace they've got and the delivering in qualifying, when they lose it all on a Sunday through dropping positions at the race starts, it's really hampering their Grand Prix, their Sunday afternoon. So they do have to find a way to get on top of it. I don't know, obviously I don't know what the answer is, because I don't know exactly what the problem is from a technical perspective there, but it's something, again, we're so limited with track time. You know, we're so limited in how often they're able to actually practice that under race conditions. They're limited in, of course, how quickly they can find a solution to it. So it is difficult, but that's part of the challenge of modern Formula One. It's based around simulation rather than old school getting a car on track and doing testing. And they're having to figure out, it's the same for everybody, of course, they're having to figure this out under a different set of parameters than they might have done in the past.
I still have the same issues, mate. It's just incredibly neutral and high speed. Can't turn the car in.
Max Verstappen on the radio there complaining about turn in, especially at high speeds as well. So he's back into the pit lane and looking for some changes being made. You just heard the sounds as well of former chief McLaren F1 mechanic Mark Priestley. Also alongside myself, Harry Benjamin, is the BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson. Jenny Gow as well, who I believe has some news on Ferrari.
Yes,
excellent.
I do. Yeah, I mean, it's not huge news, but just to keep you up to date with things, Charles Leclerc was running a new diffuser in the first practice session. Now, he set a time which was about half a second off his teammate Carlos Sainz and continues to be behind Sainz. So, big question marks about what the diffuser will do. Can it benefit them? Has Leclerc still got something in hand? But it's worth noting they do have new parts. There are other new parts floating around as well this weekend. Haas have a new diffuser. Funny that, bearing in mind that they've got a similar rear end of the car to Ferrari. Front wing end plates for Red Bull, they're trying those out. Alpine have been working hard. They've got floor updates and rear brake cover updates as well this weekend. They're saying that they haven't had time to actually make and manufacture both cars. So, I mean, they're getting parts all the time. It's fascinating across the course of a weekend. Someone said to me, if they're bringing out parts for free practice 1, they've not got it quite right because they've left it, they've got a bit too early on it and they haven't developed it as much as they could have done, which fascinated me. And just briefly worth saying that Mercedes don't have any upgrades this weekend. Alfa Romeo and AlphaTauri also no upgrades this weekend.
And just to put that into perspective, I know you were half joking about the fact that if they're bringing upgrades to FP1, they've still left some development time on the table. Back when I was at McLaren, we literally used to book flights for people out the factory that would land on Saturday night or even Sunday morning just to give us the option to bring parts, the last available opportunity to bring those parts ahead of the Grand Prix. So that was the situation. That was what people did. You can't do that in the same way today because, as I keep banging on about this morning, budget cap is restricting, some of those operations. But that was a very real situation we had where we would literally have the last couple of hours up to the Grand Prix with parts arriving for the race.
So were there people on standby for that?
Yeah, people would come out from the factory. Sometimes we'd use them, sometimes we wouldn't. But if suddenly there was a part that came off the production line that we thought we could benefit from at the racetrack, they'd be on a plane from London down to Australia, arriving on the Sunday morning, and that part would often find its way onto a car.
And we talked about this earlier, actually, off there, with the budget cap as well. It's 140 million this year, and that's steadily going to go down and down and down. Teams up and down the grid monitoring how much they spend, particularly on upgrades. But when you're at McLaren, how many, what was it, you turned up to the first race, and what version front wing was that you brought?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been to the first Grand Prix in Melbourne with the 13th iteration of a front wing package. That wasn't unusual because we'd have been testing for months before then. We started testing back in sort of October, November the year before with the new car. So we'd have gone through many iterations of front wings, rear wings, barge boards, and we'd end up in Australia at the first Grand Prix with, 13th, 14th, 15th version of some components on a car.
Wow. I think some teams would break your arm off for that now, but I think it's a good thing, I think, because we've got to save money and cut costs everywhere we can, particularly in Formula One. But so upgrades throughout the grid, but interesting note, Mercedes not bringing any until a little bit later on. It was rumoured that they might be bringing something with their wing and potentially bits on their new floor, but that hasn't come to fruition in Australia. 40 minutes and 40 39, 38, 37 seconds on the clock. Practice 2 here in Melbourne. It's Sainz ahead of Leclerc right now. Bottas, Alonso, Ricciardo, the top 5. Norris, Verstappen, Perez, Hamilton and Tsunoda, the top 10. Zhou, Gasly, Stroll, Ocon, Magnussen, Russell, the top 16. And then it's the 2 Williamses of Albon and Latifi. Mick Schumacher and Sebastian Vettel last, with no time on the board due to them changing his power unit after an issue in practice 1, which saw him end his day early in smoke. And he's currently in the garage hoping that they can get that car out in time, but it might be a race against time on that one. On board with Carlos Sainz, you're hearing now coming through the final turn 14. 2 less corners to worry about this year, 24 metres shorter as well in total around this 3.2 mile, 5.2 kilometre redesigned track. And straight away Carlos Sainz goes into turn 1 and meets the AlphaTauri and has traffic straight away of Tsunoda. He stops by him, raises a hand to him, so Sainz not happy about that, and once again we have another impediment, and I reckon that will go and be reviewed straight away, Mark.
And personally, I think that's going to be some sort of penalty, because what happens here is that you can't rely on the drivers to know there's a car coming up behind them. They have mirrors that are tiny and actually fairly ineffective anyway, but even so, the closing speeds between a car on a push lap and a car on a warm-up lap are so extreme that you need your team over the radio to give you enough information that that driver's coming on a hot lap behind you, and then you can get out of the way. And what we see here is Carlos on a fast lap. Here we hear him talk.
For Gasly, turn 1.
Yeah, so he's...
Tsunoda, yeah. Copy.
So Carlos Sainz really not happy there, because he came through turn 1 on a very fast lap, massive closing speed, and there was the AlphaTauri right on the racing line, exactly where he didn't want him. So that's frustrating as a driver, but also as a team, you lose out on the information that you were so desperate to get on that particular lap, and of course his lap is now essentially ruined.
Meanwhile, his teammate Charles Leclerc is currently going faster in second, so does he still have a little bit more pace in the tank? Still early days, as this track will get faster and faster. We're thinking qualifying times might be around 5 seconds faster than they have been, but we'll wait and see how that one pans out. But you really... all they have to do is go offline ever so slightly, and they're bringing dust, they're bringing gravel onto the track. We saw Leclerc there just going through the final few corners out a little bit wide, as a lot of that tends to be the line they're sort of taking through 13 and then into 14. But the minute you go offline, the dust that's bringing up, and that's going to have a massive effect on how they're monitoring these tyres and getting a clean lap in.
Yeah, it's really true, and that is the nature of this circuit that we often have. You know, it's tree lined, you get leaves all over it. They have to clean it in between each session, but you're right, just one driver, and we saw it a lot in FP1, one driver goes off and the whole circuit's covered in gravel, which is treacherous and of course ruins the lap for everybody else. So, but that is part of the nature of this. It's a little bit like that. You have to have a little bit of luck to get a clean lap. You've got to be a little bit strategic about when you're out on track and when you're not. And it might be a slightly different strategy to some other circuits, bearing all those factors in mind. So they're also trying to get the hang of tyres, and the circuit temperature has dropped reasonably considerably since this morning. So that has a huge difference, a huge impact on how you get the temperature into your tyres, how much of a warm-up you have to give them on the out lap. For example, how far round the lap you can push. Can you push right from turn 1 right through to the end of the lap? Or is that going to overheat your tyres? Those are the things they'll be figuring out. All running on the soft tyre, or mostly running on the soft tyre at the moment, looking more towards performance, a mixture of soft and medium tyres anyway, rather than the harder tyres that were running for a long time this morning. But Ferrari looking quick on the soft tyre, as they looked pretty quick on the hard tyre earlier on as well. So everything kind of looking good for them right now.
Yeah, although difficult to compare at the moment, because if you look at the Red Bulls, they're both on the medium, 9th and 11th, just split by Ocon, who's just put in a soft lap time as well to go 10th. So, but you're right, it does once again look very good for Ferrari. We're on board with Carlos Sainz running down the new back straight, approaching turns 9 and 10, and you can just see his head bobbing up and down, up and down, up and down. You're really getting a good example of the porpoising going on there on the Ferrari. So even arguably one of the most competitive teams right now struggling with this porpoising issue.
Well, and also what's really highlighted there is that typically we've seen the porpoising or this bouncing effect happening along the straights. I mean, you called that a straight. It's actually not a straight, is it? It's a real kind of curved part of the racetrack. If we think about some other circuits, one that springs to mind is the Turkish Grand Prix, where they got that really long left-hander of turn 3, which is flat out if you're getting that bouncing and porpoising through a turn like that, where the car's on the aerodynamic limit as well as the mechanical limit of grip, what you're doing, that bouncing effect is kind of building and losing downforce very rapidly. Now that's totally unsettling the car. Down a straight, the effect of the grip level, of course, is minimal. On a corner, it really isn't. So that's something that, you know, I think is a concern for people, and certainly people like Mercedes who are suffering more than others with that. That might start to have a bigger impact and might need to be factored in even more in terms of their mechanical setup to overcome it.
Yeah, Jenny, what do you think?
Yeah, certainly watching the Mercedes of both Russell and Hamilton, they're clearly playing around with that Mercedes to try and work out what the best compromise is, to try and limit the amount of porpoising that the drivers are having to tolerate and that the car's going through, but equally to get the right downforce level set up to get the best out of the car. Now, Mercedes are one of the more compromised teams, I would suggest. And last time out, they didn't get it right for Hamilton. The compromise was too big, and therefore when Hamilton came to qualifying, he just didn't have the car just didn't perform for him. Now this time out, you can see that they're playing around with what they're doing for Russell and Hamilton. So changing the downforce levels, changing the ride setup. Sometimes Russell is bouncing more than Hamilton, and then vice versa. Hamilton was porpoising a lot in the first practice session. So the team's really just looking for solutions, looking for the best compromise to try and make the car come alive to as much as, say, a Mercedes can do, and clearly Ferrari are in a better place to control it, but as you say, still suffering from it quite badly.
Absolutely, and suffering badly. Valtteri Bottas going straight on at turn one in his new beach Australian themed helmets. It's a brilliant piece of design on that helmet, designed by his girlfriend, but through he goes, carries on and on his way, but Bottas running out wide there. Yeah, as we're getting a replay of it now, actually. So not his head not bobbing up and down too much. The Alfa Romeo not suffering too badly, but yeah, just doesn't get it turned in, Mark.
No, again, probably struggling with tyre temperature. Most of the differences, he locked up going in, but he went in way too quickly for the grip of those tyres. So a lot of that comes down to tyre temperature. These tyres work within a certain temperature window, and they really work. Outside of that window, they really don't. And it's one of the troubles that Mercedes have had, trying to find their way into that window. They seem to have a narrower window, or a narrower operating window for their particular car. But as I was saying earlier, with track temperature, ambient temperature dropping as well, that means the drivers have to put a bit more energy themselves into those tyres to get them into that operating window, and then very meticulously and carefully manage that tyre usage to keep it in that tyre window. They have a readout on their dashboard that tells them whether they're in the right window or not, and they have to actively work throughout the lap to keep it in there. If they don't, they lose all grip, and you get a moment like that Valtteri just had, where he goes into a corner hoping he's got the grip, but he simply hasn't.
Hashtag BBC F1 if you want to get involved, or you can email us f1@bbc.co.uk. Jeremiah on the hashtag BBC F1 saying the cars are behaving like basketballs bouncing on the tarmac. This is a phenomenon, adding to the fanfare of the season. A big impact for Mercedes, but Ferrari seem to be loving it right now, on board with the Alpine, who's going mega fast at the moment. P6 currently for Alonso, but he's just set a purple middle sector, personal best in sector 1. Blitzes through turn 12 into 13. Nice line through 13. Doesn't run out too wide like lots of the other cars are doing. Onto the final and the main straight. DRS open, crosses the line. What can Alonso deliver? He goes fastest with a 1:19.5.
Yeah, really strong lap. And actually, you know, he's got purple in the middle sector. We've got 3 distinct sectors, as we always have at every racetrack. The middle sector here is that one that's had the biggest change in terms of now it's much quicker. It's taken out one of the chicanes. We've now got a very, very fast section through the middle sector. Now, typically, we'll find some cars will blitz that sector, but perhaps the trade-off is they're slower in others. We saw that last time out with Max Verstappen and the Red Bull team going for a really low downforce down the straights, but losing out to Ferrari, who had a higher downforce setup through the corners. What was interesting about that was that actually Fernando Alonso in the Alpine looked strong everywhere. He went purple in the middle sector, but his first and third sectors were also very, very strong, so that bodes well for them.
Alonso has been saying that he believes Alpine is capable of showing more than they have done in these first 2 races. You know, perhaps they shouldn't have been fighting so hard, Alonso and Ocon together in Saudi Arabia, did that prevent them from getting up the road to try and catch Russell for 5th? But Alpine have put together a tidy car here. They brought some new bits and pieces this weekend as we hear the sound of Fernando Alonso on board. But Jenny, what do you think about the two Alpines? Going well. Alonso was momentarily first, but he's gone down to 3rd right now. Ocon down in 12th at the moment, but hasn't put a proper faster lap in just yet.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was listening to an interview with Otmar Zafnauer, who's now gone over to be team principal at Alpine, and he was saying he thought that the battle between Ocon and Alonso last time out, their sort of intra-team battle, cost them about 3/10. And if anybody had been a little bit closer, I think it was Bottas that was kind of hunting them down, but they could have lost more, I think. So they're going to have to be quite careful. The team like to let their drivers race. They don't want to get too involved with things. However, they have to work out when it's advantageous for the team and when it's actually going to cost the team something. And when they've got a car that looks to be quite, behaving well, they've got to utilise the team strategy more, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Two drivers in the same team fighting each other. It's great entertainment for us, and it's great that they will let them race. That's their policy. But as a team, you have to decide what's the best thing for your team as a whole. And certainly from that perspective, it wasn't that. It will cost you time battling anybody, but if it's your teammate, it's avoidable potentially. We're actually on board now with Max Verstappen going for a real first attempt at a proper push lap on the soft tyres. So this could be a real genuine comparison. The two Ferraris currently sit at the top of the timesheets. Verstappen, though, with a decent first sector, coming through the really long, sweeping now, very fast run down towards the new turn 9 and turn 10, where he's going to come up against traffic, and that, I think, might hamper him. Yeah, he's hampered him a little bit. I think he had to lift off a little bit as he came up against traffic there, because we've seen just showing up green on the timing sectors for his middle sector, where I would have hoped for a little bit more through that really low downforce, high-speed section.
And that's something that they're going to have to deal with all weekend long. Right now, it doesn't cost them too much, but come qualifying, you come up to that, and you're not going to be very happy at all. Verstappen out the final corner, on to the main straight and across the line. What can he do? Currently 14th. Makes an improvement to 4th with a 1:19.8. So it's Sainz, Leclerc, Alonso, Verstappen the top 4 right now as he makes his way through. But traffic certainly proving something to think about here in the new look Albert Park as well. The 25th Australian Grand Prix at Albert Park, the 36th overall if you're including Adelaide and the previous Grand Prix held by Australia. Brand new track surface as well this weekend, first time resurfaced since, well, it was really built because it's a temporary street circuit, as we see again replays of Max Verstappen navigating the traffic through that incredibly fast turn 9 and 10 now, doing about 260 kilometers an hour, 7th gear corner as well, coming out of 10 into that final DRS zone as well. 4 DRS zones here in Albert Park, 2 detection zones though, so that could provide for some nice strategy.
Yeah, it was actually Lewis Hamilton that slightly got in the way. I don't think it was too serious in terms of, I don't think Lewis Hamilton particularly did anything wrong, but it doesn't take much when you're on the absolute limit like that as a driver on a push lap. That was a qualifying simulation run, and I suspect it would have just taken the edge off what could have been a slightly better lap. Still 4/10 off for Verstappen with the two Ferraris out front, a 19.3, 1:19.3 for Carlos Sainz, all on the soft tyre, all going for their qualifying simulations at this stage.
Certainly worth keeping an eye on those times, but it is looking like Ferrari and Red Bull will be up there, and the Alpines as well going very well. Ocon was down in the timing screens, but he has put a good lap to go, 4.5 tenths off P1, currently sitting in 5th. It's an Alpine sandwich with Verstappen in the middle of it right now, so they'll be really buoyed by that progress, considering the new bits and bobs they've got on the car this week.
Yeah, they will. What Red Bull need is Perez to really up his game. He did well last time out in terms of getting himself into the mix, didn't he? They need him to be there on a consistent basis. Just like Ferrari need Carlos Sainz to just find those last couple of tenths in that Ferrari to match his teammate, because Ferrari are in a really strong position. One of the best positions they've been in for a number of years with their car. They have got two very, very strong drivers. I think one of the strongest driver pairings on the grid. but Carlos just not quite finding the sweet spot of that car yet. And as I said before, it is a different driving style to get the best out of the cars this year. Perhaps it'll come, I'm sure it'll come. Carlos just trying to work his way towards that. You're hearing, of course, here, you're hearing Charles Leclerc on a fast lap, who's gone purple. Fastest of anybody in the first sector, coming into the new turn 11, which is deeper, longer, heavier on the brakes, and then a tighter turn into the right-hander, coming towards the end of the lap, running out wide on the curbs into the penultimate corner, and then past the pit lane entry, through the final corner and onto the pit straight. Let's see what the time looks like for Charles as he crosses the line. And that is first position by 4/10, so a decent lap, a 1:18.9 for Charles Leclerc.
That might raise a few eyebrows as well. What can Max Verstappen do? He's not going as fast, but can he improve on his time? He does. He goes third fastest with the 1:19.3, so 4/10 back still. So it's still Leclerc, Sainz and Verstappen. Then comes the two Alpines, Bottas, Norris, Perez, Gasly, Ricciardo, the top 10 right now.
But I'll tell you what was interesting about that. That was Verstappen, or did he get traffic again? He did.
By the way, what a show into 9-10 there.
Thanks for not screaming down the radio about it as well.
You're welcome.
So Max Verstappen just, I'm not sure if that was the replay of the last time we mentioned it, but he came up against traffic again. But I was going to say, what was interesting there, that was Verstappen's Red Bull, Charles Leclerc, both on the soft tyres, on the circuit at exactly the same time, both trying to essentially do the same thing, which is a qualifying run, and we saw 4/10 of a second between the two in terms of their lap time. I'm not 100% sure whether Max did run up against more traffic, which may have hampered him, but even so, if that wasn't the case, that's a genuine comparison of their pace at this moment under exactly the same conditions.
Hashtag BBC F1, Amit has gotten in touch. And it's looking a little bit lower down the timing screen right now. But Zhou and Schumacher, so where are they? Zhou's 15th at the moment, Schumacher 19th, quite a way off the pace of their teammates. And Amit has said, how difficult is this as a track to learn and get the best out of, even with the changes that they've made this year? Because, of course, it's a new track for everybody to get to grips with the changes, but especially for Schumacher and Zhou, it is their first time racing in Formula One in Albert Park.
Yeah, it is tricky, and it's tricky anyway because it's a street circuit. It is quite narrow. It's probably quite low grip at this point in the weekend as well, so that all makes it tricky. They have got new cars, like we keep saying. They're still getting their heads around those, but also because it's a street circuit, because it's very busy out there, everyone's out on the circuit, they've also got this other element of constantly having to be aware of where everyone else is and people in their ear saying there's a car coming up behind you, and having to manage that side of things as a young driver trying to just get your head around the circuit is another element that just thrown into the mix there that makes it tricky.
My eyebrow is raised slightly at the Haas performance right now. I know it's practice, and typically, Saudi, they were well down in the timing screens in practice, but do you think they're being extra careful this weekend? Magnussen's 16th because they haven't got a spare chassis anymore because it's being used by Schumacher after his $1 million crash in Saudi Arabia. So they're already down on parts. They're trying this new diffuser out, but they seem to be lacking a little bit of inherent speed right now, which, well, rewind this time last year wouldn't be an out-of-place thing to say, but they've certainly made an improvement.
Well, it says a lot that we are even asking that question, doesn't it, I guess, at this point?
Absolutely. Well, 22 minutes left to go in practice two. It's Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, the two Ferrari drivers leading the way. Red Bull are up there as well. Once again, it looks like it's going to be a Ferrari versus Red Bull battle. But also, don't rule out the Alpines this weekend on a new track in Albert Park. They're going well. Fernando Alonso snuck up to top the timing screens earlier on. You can listen to all the action live on Sports Extra.
And we've just seen Max Verstappen on a very, very good lap, particularly good middle sector. We said earlier that middle sector might really suit them. The changes to the circuit making that middle sector of the lap suit the Red Bull even more at high speed. He was going on a very quick lap, and then right towards the last couple of corners, just overcooked it going into the penultimate turn, I think, and had to basically back out of it. But that's a good sign for Red Bull.
It is a good sign to Red Bull as we get the replays once again on board with Max Verstappen. Let's hear his radio. Well, self-explanatory that one, I think, from Max Verstappen, getting a little bit frustrated. Jenny.
Yes, don't we all know that feeling? Right, let me give you a quick update. So we have car 18 Lance Stroll been summoned to the stewards for impeding. That's to do with an incident with car number 55, that's Carlos Sainz, who's already got one reprimand for impeding, and car number 44, Lewis Hamilton. And car number 5, which is Sebastian Vettel, has also been summoned to the stewards for the unauthorised use of a scooter on track. That was right at the end of free practice 1. Session was over. He managed to persuade one of the marshals to lend him their scooter, so he scooted back with his helmet balanced on his head. At one point he was seen and photographed with both hands off the handlebars. So let's see what happened. I got into trouble earlier from saying that the fun police were on the case. It's a serious offence, obviously. It's a very important message to say you should drive your moped safely.
Come on, Jenny, this is serious business.
I know, I'm just not very serious at 5 o'clock in the morning. I find it hard to have the brevity that one should. Sorry.
It's 7:40 now, but yeah.
Well, no, when the incident first happened.
Oh, yes, of course.
And that is the point at which I stumbled across the fun police, who said that I was being not so fun.
You weren't the only one, don't worry. I think on Twitter, many are people saying Vettel to MotoGP confirmed on that one. So we'll wait and see how that one plays out. If he can't get out on track, he might start looking at two wheels. But 90 minutes, 31, 30, 29, 28 seconds on the clock. Leclerc does lead from Sainz at the moment, who's just gone back out to warm up his tyres, setting on the soft compound tyre right now, looking at quali runs at the moment, Jenny.
Yes, just to give you one more piece of news, Sebastian Vettel unfortunately will not make it out in this session. I've just spoken to the team at Aston Martin and they say that sadly they were replacing the engine from the incident that ended his running in free practice 1. He won't make it out now, so maybe he can go to the stewards nice and early. No, don't do that. That's not fun.
That's a real surprise, you know. I know I mentioned it earlier on, but that means that either they've had a problem installing that power unit or it was a late decision, at which point they decided they had to actually replace it. We saw it break down at the end of FP1. Maybe they tried to sort of save it, to analyse it and see if they could keep it in, but it should not take that long to change these power units. I know it's a new car and things do take slightly longer earlier on in the season when you're still getting the hang of these things, but that seems like a long time to change a power unit, so hopefully nothing more serious for them.
Oh, it's we're just riding on board with Max Verstappen, who loses the back end ever so slightly coming out of turn 13. Keeps it all pointing in the same direction, though, but he did lose a bit of time in that final penultimate corner, about 2 tenths probably, which puts him, well, about nearly 2.5 tenths back. Still in second, splits the two Ferraris right now, with Carlos Sainz in third. And actually, we have just had a question come through on the hashtag BBC F1 about Carlos Sainz from Jackie, and you spoke about this earlier, Mark, saying, you know, Sainz looks like he's still got a couple of tenths to find at the moment to try and be on par with Leclerc, and Sainz saying, you know, he is making steady progress, but it's just not quite right for him at the moment. Jackie asks, I think Sainz could give Leclerc a run for his money this season. What do you think?
I totally agree. I think that he's just taking slightly longer to get to that point. I agree. They're both incredibly talented drivers and they both have a huge amount of value to offer that team. It's just that, you know, like we saw last year where certain drivers moved teams to, you know, moved from one team to another, and we saw lots of those drivers that had switched teams struggling in the early part of the season to get to grips with their new cars. Of course, everyone's got a brand new car and a very different car this year, so we're seeing some of those same things. The new cars and the new rules will suit some drivers' styles naturally, others will have to work more to get themselves into the right zone, and it looks like Carlos is one of those. Doesn't mean it won't happen, it just means it's not something that's perhaps come really naturally straight out the box where maybe it has for Charles Leclerc. So I totally agree with you, Jackie. I think that Carlos will be a real asset, and already is a real asset to Ferrari, and if they can get them both firing on all cylinders, well, that is a real strong outfit that Ferrari have put together.
Yeah, speaking to Carlos after the first race, he was saying that he just had to think way more about how he is driving the car than Charles Leclerc is, and he's having to concentrate a lot more. It's not coming so instinctively to him, and using that extra bandwidth obviously means that that is the difference, isn't it? We're talking about tiny little bits of difference that make up a tenth here and a tenth there. So I think it will come to him at some point, and obviously this weekend he is looking pretty good, but it is the margin, isn't it, that is tiny, that makes such a difference between two drivers.
Yeah, nothing in it, and that's that's great. That means one weekend he might find something, one weekend it might swing towards him and away from Charles, and this is the same up and down the grid. When you've got the likes of Daniel Ricciardo struggling compared to Lando, the same things. Tiny little differences can make a huge difference when it comes to overall lap time, particularly in such a big new era for the sport where everything's so new for people. So yeah, I wouldn't write anybody off just yet.
You can't predict anything right now in Formula One, and that is the beauty of it. Currently, let's bring in Andrew Benson, the BBC's chief F1 writer. Andrew, 15 minutes to go in this second practice session. The Alpines seem to have come alive a little bit. What have you observed so far?
Well, they're just starting the race simulation runs now, so I'll have an update on those for you in a few minutes' time when we're seeing a few laps go by. It looks to me as though Verstappen has the potential to at least match Leclerc's pace at the top. He's had a pretty slightly sort of disturbed session, traffic on a couple of runs and then another couple of laps where he made mistakes, trying a bit too hard to get a bit too much time out of the Red Bull on tyres that by then were slightly worn. So to be only a couple of tenths off, just over a couple of tenths, I would suggest that he looks like the quickest driver of the day to me, even though he's second, which is actually what Charles Leclerc, who is the quickest driver, said he was expecting yesterday, that this new revised Melbourne track would suit the Red Bull more than it suited the Ferrari. He was almost talking Leclerc as if he was sort of looking at this as a damage limitation weekend, although obviously he'll try and win if he can. The Alpine pace is very impressive. That time from Alonso particularly, he's 3 tenths up on Ocon. Only half a second off the pace. Maybe there's a bit more time in the Ferrari as well, I don't know, but I think that's encouraging for Alpine. Their big concern at the moment is not so much the car but the engine. Alonso's fitted a new engine to his car for this weekend. That's his third of the season in just 3 races, and you're only allowed 3 for the whole championship, so he knows that he's got engine penalties coming down the line. Of course, the other thing to look at from today is Mercedes. They've got no new parts here when they had intended to bring a lower drag wing. They're down in 11th and 13th place with George Russell and Lewis Hamilton. I think this is already looking like a weekend to get through for them.
Every weekend at the moment seems like a weekend to get through for Mercedes. Have to be said, though, if you look at Alpine, and what they were formerly called before that, they have a tendency of performing well on a Friday and then not being able to make it stick come qualifying in the race. So for those of you getting quite excited about Fernando Alonso currently being P4 and Esteban Ocon P6, I'm not saying you can't write, they could well be best of the rest if, everyone finishes where you'd expect them to, potentially in 7th and 8th, but I don't foresee miracles this weekend suddenly happening. They haven't bought a totally revised car. They've just got a few little bits here and there. So, I'm trying to manage expectations.
The fun police back.
Yeah, I'm sorry. 1 minute I'm this way, 1 minute I'm the other.
You are right, though, about sort of the Team Enstone, sort of the history of it. They haven't scored a top 6 result at Albert Park since Kimi Raikkonen won the 2013 race, and that was under the Lotus name. So it's for Team Enstone, shall we call them, as we get a red flag as well with 12 minutes to the session remaining. Red flag on the timing screen, so everybody has slowed down, and it is for a piece of debris that looks like it's on the racing line. Most likely it's quite a chunky piece there, Mark, isn't it? Where's that coming out of? Yeah,
difficult to see. It could be another piece of a floor. It's just after the curbs on the exit of turn 12. So it looks possibly there's a bit of gravel as well, so someone's bounced wide, gone over the curbs. They're not the most brutal curbs, but there are some big lumps and bumps. It may be that it's Lance Stroll. We're just seeing a replay here. So out he comes in, out of turn 11 and then 12, yeah. So bounces over the curbs. Let's hear him.
Something just flew off the front left.
Something did indeed fly off the front left, and it was a large chunk of his car. We'll see. We're getting another replay here. Yeah, it's part of the front deflector. So these mud guards that you see on the 2022 cars that extend up from the brake ducts and then impinge over the top of the front wheels. A big chunk of that has come off, and because it's a substantial piece and is sitting now on the racing line, they've thrown a red flag, like they did in FP1 for a similar incident, to go and collect it so a marshal can get on the circuit safely, and then we'll quickly get everyone back onto the track again.
Yeah, it was Sergio Perez in the Red Bull who lost a little bit of something important from underneath his car, which flew off, and that was the reason for the red flag in FP1. So far, each session affected by a red flag, but the clock does continue to count down in practice, and no one able to make it out there just yet. So I think we will see all the cars back into the pit lane. Lance Stroll makes it back to his garage, and the team go to work, and 10 minutes to go on the clock. You imagine, would they be able to get him back out if we can clear this up relatively quickly? Or is that day done for him?
I suspect, well, they've got 10 minutes. They may, I think it's day done if they want to probably replace that part. I mean, it depends how long the red flag is, but I don't think it's going to be very long. This is going to be indicative of this weekend, isn't it? Because that's the nature of this circuit. Not only here we've got incidents of bits flying off the car just with a bit of curb strike, but we've got walls around the edge of the circuit. If there are accidents, particularly on race day, it tends to result in a red flag. Lots of safety cars, virtual safety cars, but even red flags. So strategists, of course, will have to factor that into their race strategy for Sunday. So there we go, got a message to say that the session will resume at 4:51 local time, so less than a minute's time. So that's good. We'll get back underway quickly. But this is going to be a feature of a street circuit, that stoppages or accidents where debris ends up on the racetrack will result in either race stoppages or certainly safety cars, and that has a really big impact on how the teams build their strategy over the course of the race weekend, how they plan their pit stop strategy, how many pit stops, what point in the race they decide to go for a pit stop, or is it better to have a gamble and stay out longer in the hope that the increased chance of a safety car will play into their hands.
Mark, I'm amazed that the cars are getting out so quickly, because that was a fairly lengthy run that the marshal had to do to go out, collect the fairing winglet and then come back in. And unfortunately, as he was running so agilely towards the little stand where he lives for the race and for the practice sessions, he did fall.
Oh no.
So, I feel bad for him, but I also felt like I should mention it. There's actually another piece of bodywork still on the track. I don't think it's in the same place. I think it's
on the inside
part, isn't it?
It's on the inside of the track at that point, so it's not on the racing line. I don't think that's going to be an issue. It's a tiny piece of carbon fibre. It's well off the racing line. I mean, no car should find themselves on that bit of the circuit unless something's gone horribly wrong already. So I think that's going to be fine. 8 minutes, just over 8 minutes left on the clock. Cars starting to roll out of the pit lane and back onto the circuit. So this is going to be the last 8 minutes where people are starting to come out now on different tyres, mediums, hard compound tyres, as opposed to the softs that everyone was running earlier on, going for those performance runs. Now it's about how far can you run on these tyres? How much life have the tyres got in them? With a car that's now going to be heavy with fuel, it's going to replicate those racing conditions, and the car's going to behave very, very differently. The tyres are going to behave very differently. The drivers will need to get a feel for that, but also the team will gather a huge amount of data which will enable them to focus their setup somewhere in between the outright performance they need for qualifying and then the longevity of tyre life that they need for the race. And given that they can't change setup of the car between qualifying and race day, that's the challenge. It's always the challenge. That's what we're going to be working on here.
Lewis Hamilton still sitting in his garage. Looks like he's about to come out. The team just awaiting the all clear, and there it is. Here's Leclerc though.
So the car's reporting graining on the medium compound.
So graining is this phenomenon where you go out on the racetrack and you sort of, particularly on a new set of tyres, where you push too hard on the opening stint of your tyre, overheating the surface of the tyre, and that overheats much more quickly than the core temperatures building inside the tyre. And when that happens is the surface of the tyre, the grains of rubber form this graining pattern and almost roll off the surface of the tyre, which gives you no grip. You then slide the tyre, which overheats it more, and the problem exacerbates itself. So there's a real key method in warming the tyre up gradually. That's why we saw Max Verstappen last time out taking 2 laps to gently build the overall core tyre temperature in comparison to the tyre surface temperature, to get everything in the right window before they really start to push. So some people are already finding that on the medium tyre that's a problem.
Now, historically, Melbourne has been a one-stop race more times than not. And we mentioned it in free practice 1, but if you weren't up early enough for joining us for that one, we've got a new tyre compound that Pirelli are giving us this weekend. We've got the C2, the hard white wall tyre, the C3, the medium yellow wall tyre, which they're doing these long runs on now, and then they're bringing the C5 soft red wall tyre, but it's an extra step. They've gone an extra step. Normally they'd use the C4, but this time they're going for the fastest. The first time we've seen that this year. So is that going to dramatically affect the strategy, do we think? Tyre degradation around here they think is fairly minimal, but if Leclerc's already seeing graining, then that could well be out the window.
Well, what we have got this year is another new rule, particularly around qualifying, that says you no longer have to start the race on the tyre that you qualify or set your best time in Q2. So previously, teams would have had a decision to make. Do they qualify on a medium tyre, maybe even a harder tyre, because that's a better race tyre to start the race on? This time around, they won't need to worry about that on Saturday. So now on Saturday, that red tyre, the soft tyre, is going to be the one to qualify on, because it's going to give you the grip. It won't last very long in the race, but it's going to give you the grip. When it comes to race day, they can choose which tyre they want to start the Grand Prix on, and that is what this session now, these last 5 or 6 minutes, is all about. Is the medium tyre the one to start the race on? How long are they going to be able to go into that race, given that the cars are heavier? Is it going to degrade quickly? Is that graining going to become a problem? And if it is a problem, can they overcome it with a different warm-up strategy? These are all the things we're having to work out right now. So there's a lot of work still going on, even with only 5 minutes left of this session.
Brilliant slow-mo shots we're seeing as well of one of the Ferraris nipping through turns 9 and 10. Daniel Ricciardo on a slightly... Well, it won't be on a faster lap, but where is Ricciardo? No, he's 10th in the standings and behind his teammate right now, but on the medium tyre, McLaren looking like they found a little bit of pace compared to Bahrain. In Saudi Arabia, they could have well been on, actually, for a double points finish in Saudi Arabia, had it not been for a mechanical issue for Ricciardo putting him out of the race, because Norris managed to bag a few points, but Lando was very downhearted after the race, saying, you know, people were saying the only way is up. Well, he's like, well, no. It could very much be down as well. That's the nature of Formula One currently. We could be up there, but also straight down again.
It's very true. I think McLaren have found themselves with a couple of issues. In pre-season testing, they had some real issues around brake cooling, and the short-term fix for that was simply some bigger brake ducts, which get more air into the brakes to cool them, but of course make the car much more draggy, slowing it down the straights. And it's not just about brake cooling. Those brake ducts are a real key area. They're one of the first areas on the car that dictates some of the airflow further down the car, particularly to these crucial areas we've got now under the leading edge of the floor where much of the car's downforce is produced. So not only did bigger brake ducts that they had to put on to keep the brakes at a normal operating temperature, not only did it slow them down in terms of overall drag, I think it had the knock-on effect of deteriorating their aerodynamic performance in general. So they are now slightly on the back foot in trying to find solutions to that.
I've got a lot of air in the cockpit, in my legs. Is everything otherwise okay?
Stand by, we'll come back to you.
Charles Leclerc complaining about air?
So he's obviously got a bit of a breeze running through the cockpit. The cars actually, well, the cars do have an air hole at the front on the nose. Most of them have a little opening to allow some driver cooling, because it does get very hot in there, not just for the driver, but lots of the air electronic boxes too.
For the air, we are not sure what it is. We don't see anything wrong at the moment.
So that's inconclusive from the team back to Charles Leclerc there. Essentially, we don't know what the problem is. There's air flowing through the car, through the cockpit. It may be that something's broken on the front, but it may just be that the wind's changed direction, or he's not been used to, the temperature's dropped and he's feeling it a little bit more, but hopefully nothing serious.
Well, it's not affecting his lap times right now. He stays fastest still on that faster lap time earlier on in the session. 2 minutes to go. It's Leclerc, Verstappen, Sainz, Alonso and Perez, the top 5. Currently we're watching Alex Albon in the Williams make his way around Albert Park. Williams, the team we haven't actually spoken about too much, and well, probably because they're languishing a little bit at the back. Albon 17th, 2.9 seconds off the pace. Latifi 19th, 3.3 seconds off the pace, and they're really struggling, not just with getting the best out of their power unit package, but also just downforce in general. Latifi had a horrendous weekend in Saudi Arabia, crashing in qualifying and in the race. They're not happy at all, and one of the main factors that people are thinking is perhaps their struggle to get on top of these tyres, because unlike all the other teams, they didn't have a mule car back in testing for the first tyre test at the end of last year. So do you think that's really been the huge impact on Williams? Because it's not what any of us want to see them languishing once again down at the back.
No, it really isn't. I mean, they're another team that's been building from the inside in terms of structure. They are looking towards a better future. So I think that there is future for them, and I think they're heading in the right direction. So only time will tell. But yeah, a tough start to the season. But you know what, Harry? We have got, less than a minute to go now in this session, free practice 2, which means that it's time for this.
Long Run Corner with Andrew Benson.
You can go the distance, we'll find out.
There's not a lot of data to go from, I'm afraid. It didn't help having that red flag just as the teams were starting their long runs. But what data we do have is suggests that Verstappen, as we were talking about on the one-lap pace, does have a slight pace advantage over the Ferraris. On average, he's about 2.5 tenths quicker than Charles Leclerc, both running the medium tyre, Verstappen doing 2 laps representatively and Leclerc 3. What I would say, however, to caveat that, is that their fastest laps on their race runs are both almost identical. Leclerc did a 1 minute 22.910 and Verstappen a 1 minute 22.920. So it's hard to be sure what's accurate there. Is it the actual headline fastest lap time comparison on the race run, or is it the average? Normally you would take the average, but the data set's very low. Mercedes, unfortunately, don't look quick at all. Russell and Hamilton both only done 1 lap, but they're in the 24s, so the second and a half off the Ferraris and Red Bulls, and around about the same pace as Alonso in the Alpine, which does suggest, as Jenny was implying earlier, that Alonso's 4th place on the headline fastest single lap times isn't perhaps as representative as Alpine might hope. Maybe Mercedes are going to keep that place as the 3rd fastest team, but that's just a guess at the moment.
Well, thank you, Andrew. Well, it certainly looks like it's going to be another Red Bull-Ferrari battle at the moment, but that brings us to the end of second free practice in Australia. It is Leclerc who tops the time. He's ahead of Verstappen, Sainz, Alonso and Perez, the top 5. Then it's Ocon, Bottas, Norris, Gasly, Ricciardo, the top 10. Russell, Tsunoda, Hamilton, Stroll, Zhou, Magnussen, the top 16. And then Albon, Schumacher and Latifi, the last of the runners to set a time. Sebastian Vettel is 20th and last, but he didn't even get out to set a time because of a power unit change, and they couldn't get him out in time to set any lap time at all.
So that is free practice 1 and 2 done and dusted. Your Friday of free practice in Australia, and Charles Leclerc tops the time boards. Sainz topped free practice 1, and by my headlines, that's red flags and red cars. And a very funny moment with a Marshall, which I'm still chuckling about. I'm such a child. Poor Marshall fall over, and I just laugh at it. But in all seriousness, this season we're talking about this battle between Verstappen and Leclerc, Ferrari versus Red Bull, and it sets it up beautifully for the rest of the weekend, doesn't it? That this will be another really good battle between the two of them.
Yeah, as Andrew said there's not very much between them on long run pace. There's not very much between them on the qualifying runs either. I think there's still more to come from Max Verstappen. Second in the timesheets, a couple of tenths off, but actually there was more, I think, from the performance out of that car. Not the cleanest of laps on either of his qualifying runs. So, look, we are set up for not only it's looking like a great season ahead, but a great weekend here. And as we said earlier, the changes to the circuit will only really come into fruition in terms of do they deliver better racing on Sunday. So a really exciting prospect for me.
A huge amount of work clearly to be done by the teams. The drivers will sit down, they'll have their debriefs, the simulators will be running, and parts maybe being, as you say, being flown out to Australia as we speak to get upgrades on them as much as they can for tomorrow ahead of qualifying. But Harry, I think everybody's been waiting to get back to racing in Australia. It seems like a very long time ago that we were all there waiting for a race to take place in 2020. It never happened, and I think the crowds will be delighted that motorsport is back and that it's a different landscape.
Yeah, I think there's just a general positive vibe, isn't there, to being back in Melbourne. We're so hopeful that the track changes are going to make the racing good as well come Sunday. But right now, it's just a privilege to be back in Melbourne anyway. It's 757 days since everyone was told to go home in 2020. So the fact we've got teams back, some making their debut, Daniel Ricciardo on the grid as well, looking like he might be in the hunt for points. It's all positive signs for Sunday.
We've only got a minute to go, and I'm going to ask a really silly question, Mark. But I'm going to do it, and you're going to have to do it succinctly with an answer. Does it matter what kind of track it is? Does it matter whether it can be good racing or bad racing when you've got 2 cars and 2 drivers so equally matched?
Yes. It does, because, yes, we've got 2 cars closely matched, but we want to see them on a circuit where we can see those 2 cars pushing each other all the way from the lights going out to the flag dropping at the end, wheel to wheel, changing positions. We've had it in the first couple of races. I want to see it again this weekend in the sunshine down in Melbourne, and I hope that the changes that we've had made to this track will enable us to do that. We haven't been able to do it in the past couple of visits to this circuit. Let's hope we can have it this time around.
Okay, that told me. Let us know your thoughts. We're always here to hear them. Hashtag BBC F1 or F1 at bbc.co.uk. My thanks to Harry, also to Mark, to Andrew, to our producer Patrick, to everybody that's helped the production. Go and get some sleep. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.